Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are done defending. They are officially moving from a posture of containment to a strategy of total offense. Just 4 days ago, the world's top intelligence agencies and geopolitical analysts could not have predicted this sudden pivot. Now we are witnessing a historic transformation where all three Gulf powers are preparing to strike the Iranian mainland directly. But the stakes have just been pushed to the absolute limit. Pakistan has issued a chilling warning that could turn this regional skirmish into the world's first religious nuclear war. To understand how we reached this precipice, we have to look at the moment Iran made a massive, catastrophic miscalculation. It all started when Tehran decided to retaliate against Gulf countries that had absolutely nothing to do with the initial strikes on Iranian soil. Take a look at this footage from a residential area in Qatar. This isn't a military base. This isn't a command center. This is a neighborhood where families live, where children go to school. Yet Iran's missiles rained down here, turning quiet streets into a war zone. When asked for an explanation, Iran's excuse was as hollow as it was dangerous. They claimed they couldn't reach the continental United States, so they targeted U.S. bases in the Middle East instead. But look at the map of their actual strikes. They aren't hitting hardened military silos. They are hitting shopping malls, international airports, luxury apartments, and critical port infrastructure. These are civilian targets, hit with calculated intent. Iran's leadership essentially told their neighbors, "Don't be mad at us for bombing your cities. Be mad at America for starting this." They called the Gulf nations brothers in their speeches while launching Shahed drones at their skyscrapers. This argument is now backfiring catastrophically. The central question everyone is asking is, why? Why would Iran intentionally provoke Oman, a country that has been a diplomatic lifeline for the regime for decades? Why target Cyprus, a nation that has stayed entirely out of this conflict? The answer, recently uncovered by the Financial Times, explains the madness. This entire scorched earth strategy was personally devised by Ayatollah Khamenei himself. It was drafted immediately after the 12-day war, a conflict where Iran suffered a humiliating and devastating defeat. Khamenei's plan was chillingly simple. If another war starts, make the entire Middle East feel the pain. Do not distinguish between combatants and neutrals. Strike energy facilities to collapse the global economy. Strike airports to paralyze travel. Target anything and everything until the cost of the war becomes too high for the United States to continue. This information comes directly from a regime insider who warns that this plan is not going to stop. In fact, it is designed to escalate. There is a dark religious dimension to this strategy that the West is only just beginning to grasp. Khamenei, the architect of this chaos, is now dead. But for the hardline ideologues left in power, he wasn't just a political leader. He was a divinely inspired figure. They view the destruction of the region not as a failure of policy, but as a sacred homage to their supreme leader's final orders. They are following his blueprint to the letter, regardless of the consequences. Even if the current leadership wanted to stop, they might not be able to. During the 12-day war, Israeli intelligence managed to decapitate Iran's top command structure within hours. That success delayed Iran's response because every move required a green light from the top. To prevent that from happening again, Iran decentralized its entire military. Small units within the IRGC now have complete freedom to launch retaliatory strikes on their own initiative. They have preset instructions from the late Ayatollah and don't need a central command to tell them when to fire. The Iranian foreign minister confirmed this in a stunning interview, essentially admitting that the dogs of war have been unleashed and no one is holding the leash. However, there is one thing Tehran failed to anticipate. This total pain strategy didn't force the U.S. to back down. Instead, it did the impossible. It united the entire Middle East against Iran. Former General David Petraeus pointed out that Iran has made a massive strategic blunder. By attacking countries that tried to remain neutral, like Qatar and the UAE, they have forced these nations into the fight. Countries that were content to sit on the sidelines are now contributing their own air forces to the mission. They are no longer just intercepting drones. They are preparing for the offensive. The Gulf nations now realize that Iran is an existential threat. They see a regime willing to burn the entire neighborhood down just to stay in power. And they are asking the terrifying question: what happens when a regime this desperate gets its hands on nuclear weapons? What happens when their ballistic missiles have a longer range and more destructive payloads? This fear has triggered a massive military response. Look at Qatar. Only a year ago, Doha was one of Iran's closest partners in the region. That relationship is dead. Qatar has severed all diplomatic ties, shuttered the Iranian embassy, and evacuated its personnel. But more importantly, Qatar has started fighting back. In a significant military escalation, the Qatari Air Force recently engaged Iranian Su-24 fighter bombers. These weren't just automated drones being shot down by a defense system. This was air-to-air combat. Qatari pilots, flying advanced Western jets like the F-15 and the French Rafale, intercepted and destroyed Iranian-piloted aircraft over the Gulf waters. This marks a point of no return. A GCC country has used its own military force to take down Iranian assets. The message is clear: the era of Gulf neutrality is over. From the boardrooms of Saudi Aramco to the flight decks of Qatari carriers, the region is mobilizing for a confrontation that will reshape the world. While Qatar's air-to-air combat marks a historic turning point, the true center of this seismic shift lies in Saudi Arabia. Just yesterday, the red line wasn't just crossed, it was obliterated. Iran launched a massive, coordinated strike targeting Ras Tanura, the largest oil refinery on the face of the earth. To put this in perspective, 7% of the entire global oil supply flows through this single facility every single day. If this refinery burns, the global economy doesn't just stumble, it collapses. While the refinery itself was spared a direct hit, the fire caused by falling drone debris forced Saudi Arabia to do the unthinkable. They halted all operations. The world's biggest energy lifeline was shut down by Iranian aggression. The Saudi leadership is no longer interested in playing defense. For years, the kingdom has been cautious, trying to balance regional stability with its own economic vision. But you cannot build a future when your neighbor is trying to burn down your house. According to senior Western diplomats and intelligence cables, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are now finalizing plans to join offensive strikes inside Iranian territory. We are hearing reports that Qatari jets have already struck targets across the Gulf in retaliation for the attacks on Doha International Airport, one of the world's busiest transit hubs. While the Qatari Prime Minister is officially pushing back against these reports to maintain a diplomatic cushion, his tone has shifted. He is no longer talking about de-escalation. He is talking about the sovereign right to self-defense and total deterrence. The coordination we are seeing right now is unprecedented. Military sources in Riyadh tell us that the Saudi Air Force is hours, not days, away from launching its own sorties into Iranian airspace. This level of aggression would have been impossible just a few years ago. Why? Because the entire architecture of the Middle East has changed. Previously, Israel was isolated, attached to the European command because Arab states refused to recognize its existence. But the Abraham Accords changed the DNA of regional security. Israel was moved under the umbrella of U.S. Central Command, and for the first time in history, we are seeing a division of labor between Jerusalem and the Gulf states. While the Gulf nations prepare to strike Iran's infrastructure and energy sectors, Israel is handling the decapitation phase. Just today, reports emerged of a massive strike on a secret meeting of top religious scholars in Qom. These were the men gathered to decide the successor to the late Ayatollah Khamenei. Israel isn't just targeting missiles, they are targeting the very ideology of the regime. The Gulf states, which once blocked the U.S. from using their bases to attack Iran, are now opening their hangars and coordinating flight paths with Israeli commanders. Iran's strategy of making everyone feel the pain has achieved the one thing they feared most: a unified, nuclear-backed coalition dedicated to their destruction. And this brings us to the most terrifying dimension of this war: the Pakistani factor. In all the chaos involving Israel, the U.S., and Iran, the world has forgotten about the mutual defense agreement signed between Islamabad and Riyadh last year. This isn't just a piece of paper. It is a NATO-style nuclear protection pact. The terms are crystal clear. An attack on the territorial integrity of Saudi Arabia is legally considered an attack on Pakistan itself. As the fires still burn at the Ras Tanura refinery, the Pakistani foreign minister has just issued a final, chilling warning to Tehran. He explicitly told the Iranian regime that if they continue their strikes on Saudi soil, they are no longer just fighting a regional war. They are entering a conflict with a nuclear-armed power. Pakistan is the only Muslim nation in the world with a nuclear arsenal, and they have spent decades refining their delivery systems. For the first time since the Cold War, we are looking at a scenario where a conflict could go nuclear, not because of a superpower showdown between Washington and Moscow, but because of a regional explosion between Islamic neighbors. There is a cruel, tragic irony at the heart of this escalation. The Iranian regime has long claimed to be the leader of the Shia world, often positioning itself against the Sunni majority states. Yet, Pakistan has a massive Shia population, the very people Khamenei claimed to protect. Now, because of Tehran's scorched earth policy, those same people are part of a nation preparing to launch a nuclear-capable response against the Iranian regime. Iran thought that by attacking the Gulf, they could force the United States to the negotiating table. They thought they could use fear as a lever to survive. Instead, they have convinced every single neighbor that the current regime in Tehran is an existential threat to human civilization. From the Mediterranean to the Indus River, the trap is closing. The next 24 hours will likely determine if the Middle East remains a region of nations or becomes a nuclear wasteland. The Supreme Leader's plan is being followed to the letter, but the final chapter isn't the victory he imagined. It is the total, collective suicide of his revolution. But there is an even deeper layer to this conflict that most mainstream news outlets are completely missing. Beyond the missiles and the nuclear threats, a silent, invisible war is being fought in the digital and maritime realms. And it's a war that Iran is losing. For decades, Tehran's greatest weapon wasn't its aging air force. It was its ability to choke the global economy at the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow strip of water is the jugular vein of the world's energy supply. Iran's final plan included the total mining of these waters, a move that would send global oil prices to $300 a barrel overnight. However, sources within the U.S. Fifth Fleet and the Emirati Navy suggest that a massive covert demining operation has been underway for the last 72 hours. Using advanced underwater autonomous vehicles and AI-driven sonar, the coalition has been quietly neutralizing Iran's maritime trap before it could even be sprung. This means that Iran's ultimate leverage, the threat of a global economic heart attack, is being dismantled in real time. Without the ability to hold the world's oil hostage, the regime in Tehran is finding itself increasingly backed into a corner with no exit strategy. Furthermore, we are seeing an unprecedented internal collapse within the Iranian military itself. Reports are surfacing of a, quote, silent mutiny among the regular Iranian army, the Artesh. Unlike the IRGC, which is fiercely loyal to the religious ideology of the late Ayatollah, the regular army is composed of national conscripts who see the destruction of their country as a price too high to pay for a dead man's vision. We are hearing whispers of high-ranking officers refusing to relay the, quote, independent strike orders to their units. This creates a terrifying House of Cards scenario. While the IRGC's small, radicalized units are firing missiles at malls and airports, the backbone of Iran's conventional defense is beginning to fracture from within. The geopolitical map is being redrawn as we speak. For the first time, we are seeing the new Middle East in action, a coalition that doesn't just include the U.S. and Israel, but a unified Arab front that is technologically and militarily superior to anything Iran can field. The Russian-made S-300 and S-400 systems that Iran relied on for protection have proven to be paper tigers against the electronic warfare suites of the Qatari and Saudi F-15s. This isn't just a shift in power, it's a total technological humiliation of the Eastern military bloc. As the clock ticks toward the intense 24 hours promised by regional officials, the world watches the border between Iran and Pakistan. If a single Pakistani missile crosses that line in response to a strike on Saudi Arabia, the nature of global warfare changes forever. We are no longer talking about proxy wars or asymmetric shadows. We are talking about a total regional reset. The Iranian leadership thought they could burn the neighborhood to save the house, but they forgot one thing. When you start a fire in a desert, the wind can change direction at any moment. And right now, the wind is blowing directly back toward Tehran. But perhaps the most devastating blow to the Iranian regime isn't coming from the skies or the sea. It's coming from their own axis of resistance. For decades, Tehran's power was projected through its proxies: Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militias in Iraq. The plan was always to use these groups as a human shield, a buffer to keep any war far away from Iranian soil. However, in the last 48 hours, that shield has shattered. As Saudi Arabia and Qatar prepare their offensive, they aren't just looking at Tehran. They are cutting the supply lines that keep these proxies alive. We are receiving reports of a massive naval blockade in the Red Sea, led not by the United States, but by a combined task force of Egyptian and Saudi vessels. For the first time, the Houthis are finding themselves completely isolated, their warehouses of Iranian-made missiles running dry as the mothership in Tehran struggles to defend its own borders. In Lebanon, the situation is even more dire for the regime's interests. With Iran's central command in chaos following the death of the supreme leader and the subsequent Israeli strikes on Qom, Hezbollah's leadership is reportedly paralyzed. They are receiving contradictory orders, some telling them to launch a full-scale invasion of northern Israel, others telling them to stand down and conserve their strength for a civil war that looks increasingly likely. When the independent units of the IRGC started firing at malls and airports in the Gulf, they didn't just provoke the Arab states. They abandoned their proxies to face the consequences alone. This brings us to the internal state of Iran itself. As the intense 24-hour window approaches, the Iranian rial has hit an all-time low. People aren't just panic buying food, they are flooding the streets in cities like Tabriz and Mashhad. This isn't just another protest for civil rights, it's a survival reflex. The Iranian people realize that the final plan of their late leader is essentially a suicide pact. They see the Qatari F-15s and the Saudi strike packages gathering on the horizon, and they know that their own government has traded their future for a series of failed drone strikes on civilian targets. The cruel irony we mentioned earlier, the Pakistani nuclear factor, is now being echoed by a domestic uprising that the IRGC might not be able to contain. If the regime has to fight a nuclear-armed Pakistan, a unified Arab-Israeli coalition, and its own starving population simultaneously, the Islamic Republic as we know it will cease to exist before the week is over. We are standing at the end of the, quote, proxy era. The days when Tehran could hide behind militias while burning the region are over. The war has finally come home to the doorsteps of the commanders in Tehran. The world is watching. The silos in Pakistan are warm, the Western jets are fueled, and the people of Iran are waiting for the spark that finally ends the nightmare. This isn't just a military conflict anymore. It is the final collapse of a 45-year-old experiment in regional chaos.